So let's talk about podcasts. Clearly, we're preaching to the choir here because we all big believers in podcasting, but I think there need to be more physician voices out there, right? It is really fun for building your brand, building your network.
I think that podcasting has a very real impact on how you can engage with people in a way that's very different. When you hear someone else's voice in your ears, you get to know them.
One of the reasons why we came together to start what's called the Doctors Podcast Network is we're seeing a lot of doctors have trouble starting up their own podcasts. So Doctors Podcast Network is set to launch
Soon.
If you guys are starting a podcast or have a podcast right now and want to connect with other physicians, you need to go to this link, drpodcastnetwork.co. Sign up. They'll get you on our waiting list.
So for me, I just see podcasting continuing to get bigger and bigger, which I think is an important point because sometimes one of the things that will prevent people from stepping into this space is they have this idea that it's oversaturated. I always tell people that's not really a thing.
We're actually collaborating together to provide a new community that we're trying to build to help other physicians start up their own podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the intro webinar for the Doctor Podcast Network. Thank you so much for joining us. So why are we here? We want to tell you because we're so excited about the network. Us veteran podcasters, physician podcasters have gotten together and created the product that we wished had existed when we were starting, right? It's going to be community. There are going to be aspects of it that can help lighten your load, make things easier, answer the questions that you have. And so that's what the network is all about. You're going to be there with other physicians like yourself who are trying to create a product, brand yourselves, grow your audience, and we're here to help you. So thanks so much for coming to join us. So I want to introduce everyone who's doing this with us. So we have Dr. Jimmy Turner. He's also known as the physician philosopher. You can see behind him, Money Meets Medicine is his show. And actually, I had him on my show back in 2019 when I was first starting. So we've known each other for a long time. We've also got Dr. Mike Woo-Ming, also known as Bootstrap MD, who helps physician entrepreneurs to do exactly that. And then last but absolutely not least, we have got Desiree Leos, who has been in this very niche space of physician to physician podcasting for longer than I've been podcasting, which is over 6 years. So we're all going to be introducing ourselves and just say who we are, and then we'll kick this thing off. So actually, Jimmy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Happy to go. So as Brad mentioned, Jimmy Turner, I host a podcast called Money Meets Medicine in the financial literacy space for physicians. I have been podcasting for about 5 years now. And love it. I actually started out blogging at the Physician Philosopher, wrote a book by the same name, ended up joining the White Coat Investor Network as one of the 4 original partners there. And I found out that I liked actually talking behind a microphone more than I do typing on a keyboard. Turns out when you have trouble spelling, that blogging is a little harder than speaking into a microphone because you can't tell that I can't spell on this because it's a microphone, right? So the beauty of that and letting people get to know you, that no trust, podcasting is probably the best way and most accessible way to reach other physicians and your audience, because guess what? We listen when we're driving cars and when we're working out and when we're doing the dishes and we are busy human beings. And so podcasting is one of the things that can fit in with stuff that we already do. And so I started podcasting to help other doctors learn how to become financially independent. Back in the day, the slogan was to fight burnout with financial independence so that you can practice medicine because you want to, not because you have to, and still very much passionate about that mission, which I carry on at Money Meets Medicine. So that kind of started my journey. That's me in a nutshell for now. I'll stop, pause, and maybe toss the baton over to Mike.
Hey guys, Mike Woo-Ming here. I am the founder of Bootstrap MD, which is a podcast, as Brad said, for physician entrepreneurs. Was my 3rd attempt at a podcast. I still remember when podcasts where the pod was related to you would download something which is known as an iPod.
I think I saw that in an antique store.
I think so. But the reason why I started a podcast is I get writer's block a lot. As Jimmy was saying, I can't type, I can't write. When I try to write something down, it takes me forever, but I can talk and I can ramble on for a half hour, 45 minutes per week. And I didn't find much in terms of being able to connect with physicians through blogs at the time. But what I did know, just because of being a doctor myself, was many of us have our long commutes, and especially here in Southern California. And a podcast was a way where during that time of their commute, if they listened to my podcast, I would have a captive audience and then talk about different topics on my day. And I go, because we get so many messages and so much content that's out there on the internet, how do you stand out? And so for me, it was through my podcast where I talk about how I deal with being an entrepreneur, how I deal with being a physician. I've had experts as yourself being on my program as well and sharing their knowledge. It was really just a way of just having my little space on the interwebs, talking about things that interest me and maybe some people out there, the content I have might interest them as well.
It's similar for me. It's funny how both of you said Jimmy was spelling and Mike, you had tried blogging, but found that the podcasting was easier. For me, it was the same thing. Like I had struggled with doctor-patient communication, right? I'd seen many people in my practice were able to go through their schedules efficiently. I was getting home 2-3 hours after my hours. Like patients were waiting forever. There was something I was doing wrong about like communicating. So I wanted to have experts in front of me. And I found all these experts on podcasts, but none of them were talking to doctors. They were all talking about dating or sales or executives or lawyers or whatever. So I wanted to originally take their ideas and turn them into a book specifically for doctors. And then I never sat down and wrote a book. It just never, and then I was going to do it as a blog and I never wrote a single word. And then I was like, I'll just do my own podcast. And so that has allowed me to get these amazing world-class experts in front of me to get me just like the same as Mike was saying. I have questions, I want answers. And I'm sure if I have those questions, other doctors are going to want to hear that as well. And so it's funny how our podcasting journeys have so much in common. And actually, I had been in the orbit of Desiree for years and was like chomping at the bit for the ability to work with her because we knew of each other and then we finally met each other, but she had so much going on. She never had the capacity to work with me. And then finally the opportunity came along and we started working together. And that's when, things were going. So we're like, hey, why don't what we've got going? Because what I do in my personal workflow is I sit down, I record, and that's it.
And then Desiree does everything else.
And then Desiree does everything else because physicians are short on time. And to sit there and learn how to edit and learn how to do all these things that you're doing for me, there have to be other physicians out there that'd be interested. And so that was how the network, the idea for the network was born. And so we spoke to Jimmy and we spoke to Mike and we talked about each other's pain points and we came up with some products. So Desiree, why don't you introduce yourself now?
Yeah, I think out of everyone on this call, I'm the one that people know least about. I've been hearing from y'all for several years, and they'll probably may have heard my name in passing in one of the shows that y'all have talked about podcasting, and I may have mentioned me. But so I'd like to share a little bit about who I am personally, and then I'll fold into why I'm here and looking forward to being a part of this with y'all. About me, I live in Texas, very South Texas, in an area called the Rio Grande Valley. I'm native to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I have 2 kiddos, a toddler who just turned 5, toddler daughter who just turned 5 a couple of weekends ago, and a preteen son who just turned 12. So I'm in the thick of it with them. But when I'm not obsessing over my children, I am obsessing over business and the auxiliary businesses that I have a direct impact on, including yours and this and the shows that I have launched and soon to launch and lead or manage in some capacity. And I find fulfillment in being on the back end. Really, I am so accustomed to just handing everything off to you. I'd much rather be on the back end here and made sure that Facebook was streaming okay and we got LinkedIn all right. And instead, I'm on here talking with y'all as if I've been doing this for a long time. I have not. But anyway, that's as far as why I enjoy doing this and why I'm excited to be here with y'all. I am for the better part of a decade, I have been working with this very specific niche of people, these people being doctors, in my eyes, being some of the most important people in really just contributing to our communities. Y'all help people every day. You're heroes in my eyes. And on the flip side, who is here to support you when you need the help? I've been able, over the years, to acquire skills that I'm able to help you with to start a podcast and keep it going for many months and many years down the road. So anyway.
I feel like this is the part where that Liam Neeson Taken, I have a special set of skills. But truthfully, Desiree, you do. And I think that, so that people understand, you really are the secret sauce behind a lot of what we're going to be doing here at the Doctor Podcast Network. So it's really important to know that you have that fund of knowledge that's necessary to launch a show, to get things off the ground, to continue to make them successful. And we're incredibly thankful that you're a part of this. So super excited to talk more about it.
Yeah, thank you.
So that's where Desiree comes in. She takes those pain points that we have in starting a podcast and growing a podcast and the logistics of making it happen every week. She takes those pain points and she makes them go away. That's why we want to, one, spread the gospel about how awesome it is to have a podcast and how easy and fun it can be if you have the right support. And so that's why we want to be the support. And actually, I guess I didn't fully introduce myself because I'm the host of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring podcast. And yeah, I've been doing this for 400 shows and over 6 years. And it's been
6 years.
It's been great. It's been an amazing journey and just beginning, as they say. So actually, why don't we start with some questions for the other leadership, the other founders? What are our pain points that we have for creating a show?
Yeah, so I could talk about this one. So let's go to the entrepreneur world for a second. So since Mike lives there too, right? So every successful business, you have a visionary and you have an integrator, right? So you've got the big picture thinker that's abstract problem solving. This is where we're going. This is why. And then you've got the person that says, hey, those ideas are great, but in order to make those things happen, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, and you can't do that. And so you need to have the ability to marry both of those things. And so for me, I've always been that abstract problem solving, complex, loving guy. That's just what I do. I like making complicated things simple. And what I hate, the pain points for me have always been details, which involve getting things up on the various platforms when I first started. By the way, I didn't do that. Desiree did. The process of editing a podcast, I've tried that. It turns out that I'm not too great at it. So I asked Desiree to see if we could help us do that too. And so the more that I realized that I was able to do the big picture stuff, like Brad, you were talking about a second ago, get to meet people, get to interview people, do the research, read the books, understand the ideas, bring a great set of questions and conversation in front of someone else, and then hit record on various topics and different episodes, that all the other detail stuff that happens after that is something that, to be honest, in times past has actually led to me to stop the show. I had a 6-month period where I didn't podcast at all. I've probably had 300 episodes at this point, between the Physician Philosopher podcast, which is a solo show, and Money Meets Medicine, where I've always had a co-host and or interviews. And so I've done both styles, and I stopped both of the shows for a good 6 months at one point. And the reason why was because the production on the back end became a bit of a challenge. I spent so much time getting things written down and ideas to discuss, but really putting all of the things together and making it less stressful was hard for me. And I got a head start because when I started this podcast, I was co-hosting with someone else who had experience there. And so I hear other pain points that other people have. And what microphone do I use? And like, how do I get up on these different platforms? And how do I keep my stuff organized? And what's the best way to land guests for the show? And how do I structure my interviews or the show itself to get people to listen? And all of these questions prevent a lot of people from starting. And so that pain point wasn't there for me as much as okay, I'm here. I have a microphone because someone told me which one to buy. What do I do next? And that just stopped me for a while from even starting. So I stayed behind my keyboard and kept misspelling words until finally Desiree's team came along and said, hey, we can help you do this. And so for me, it was the pain point of all of the details that I felt like as a busy physician, I didn't have time to sort out.
Yeah, I had the same experience, the analysis paralysis. I probably thought about podcasting for 2 or 3 years before I actually started a podcast. And that was because one of my wife's friends offered to edit it. Like, she was a professional voiceover artist. So my first 20 or 30 shows were all edited by her because I didn't even know, like, where do you find it? I thought you had to edit it yourself. I didn't know that. And then which mic. So you can spend forever dwelling on these details that aren't that important. If you only had some advice from some people who had been through a similar experience, it'll make all that happen. What do I need to do with myself? What can I outsource? And how do I get this off the ground? And so those are the common pain points for everybody. And so that's where we can make it go away. Mike, what about you? What were your pain points?
You guys talked about just the mechanics of actually just getting the podcast episode there. But I think maybe I'll give you a little bit philosophical, not to become a physician philosopher. But if a physician launches a podcast, but nobody listens to it, do they really have a podcast?
That's a great question.
That comes down to marketing. You can create the episode, but then how else are you going to distribute it? And that's also part of it too. It's now that we have the podcast. Before it was, you could listen to it on Apple, but now you can do it on Stitcher and Spotify and on Amazon podcasts. And there's all these different distribution channels. And these are just more ways that you can get your message down. And then if you use video, now you're on YouTube and Instagram and different things like that. That takes time. So there was a lot, and a lot of doctors who want to get into it don't realize it's no longer a one man or one woman show. If you really want to have a professional looking recording, you're going to need other people or other tools. And I think also as part of the Doctor Podcast Network is we're always searching for the best tools that we can out there, using AI to help us with getting transcripts up on that. And I think that's why having a community of other podcasters because I'm not going to be able to know which one is better or not. I don't have the time to do that. And I think we're going to have one of the reasons why we started the Doctor Podcast Network. For me, it's being surrounded by other physician podcasters is going to be very beneficial than trying to do this all on your own.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I do want to piggyback on that as in terms of, because it naturally leads into the question of like, why did you start this? To help with all of those pain points, right? And I'm a big believer, like it's always rubbed me the wrong way when people are like, oh, the people that come behind us, like they need to have it as hard as we did. And I've always been like, hey, if I had to walk uphill both ways in snow, shouldn't I just help people? If the snowmobile exists, just hand it to them and help them get up the mountain a little faster. And so for a lot of reasons, working with people that have already done the thing that you're looking to do and or who have made it easier than it historically has been for you if you already have a show, being that catalyst to speed up that journey so that you do hit the ground running and then you keep running is really the reason that I feel like I was super excited about starting this, because we're going to dive into the nooks and crannies of what we're going to offer as a community in terms of production, in terms of resources, and the whole 9 yards. But at the end of the day, the idea for me, at least, is to speed up the journey of other physicians who are starting a podcast or already have one, or maybe they stopped it like I did and they want to pick it back up so that their journey isn't so hard and they can get things to where they want to be. And why not use a community and a group of resources that help you do that as quickly and as efficiently and with the most time saved?
And like you said earlier, Jimmy, like you would taken breaks from podcasting because you were doing a lot of the work yourself, and it'll burn you out. It'll burn you out. And so there were a lot of important physician voices that are out there that stopped making shows because of that. And so if we can lower the bar and have them just do the parts that they really love, then the world benefits from hearing their voices, and they clearly benefit from it as well. We have a question from the audience already, and one of the question is the network only for podcasts geared towards a physician audience, or can it be for a more general audience as well? And so this is actually something that we had discussed amongst ourselves, because it was that originally it was for these B2B, right? Business to business, physician to physician podcasts. And part of the reason we were going to narrow it to that is because that's who the advertising that we have is really geared towards. And so if you're going to have ads on your show, because the physician ear is such a high value ear, it would be a way to have ads on your show, would be a way to cover some of the overhead and maybe make some money off of your podcast. The general audience, we certainly welcome you as part of our community. And actually, we'll talk about our offerings later. There's going to be an offering there where you can even have ads on your show as well. So we do welcome you as part of our community.
So to be clear, if you're a physician who has a podcast, we're your friends.
It was a very long-winded way of saying what Jimmy just said. Yes.
No, you're good. You're good. That question comes from a friend of mine. It's good to see you, Crystal. I'm glad you're listening in.
Okay. Desiree, is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't said so far as far as pain points that we've worked with so many doctors, things that they're like, oh, thank God you were able to take care of that because it was killing me.
Yeah, from the very first call that I have with them, they'll let me know that they had been thinking about doing a podcast for a couple of years, like you, or a year or 6 months. And within the 30 minutes that we chat about what it is that they had envisioned for the podcast, they feel like they've learned a lot during that time versus the amount of time that they've spent trying to figure it out on their own. So it was really the paralysis by analysis that was stopping them from doing it. And it was just the technical aspect. So it's very logistically hard for someone who doesn't know what to do or know the workarounds for, let's say, getting your show syndicated on Apple. There's specific guidelines to get validated by Apple. If you don't know that you need to have your artwork rendered 1400 by 1400 pixels, you're going to get rejected. If your artwork is not clear, it's very abstract, it maybe low res pictures on it, it's going to get rejected by Apple. And you won't know that up to 7 days after attempting to get validated by Apple. So if you've done announcements, hey, I'm launching on a specific day, it's going to hold you up from actually launching your show on one of the biggest syndication platforms that you need to be on. It's those things. It's not knowing the gates, what they should know going in when syndicating the show. It's also not knowing what marketing that they should be pulling together. Do they need a landing page online that feeds the podcast? Do they need to have Facebook? Do they need to have maybe a TikTok page? Do they have to have YouTube? I think I'm starting to hear from more doctors that they want to do audio and video. So look at us experimenting with this brand new live streaming tool. But anyway, yeah, it's just a number of things. The details, not everyone has the time to figure it out. That's my job. I need to get through the details for you to get to the next bridge after launching your show. And the next bridge is helping you organize thoughts, organize the infrastructure behind the scenes to make sure that you're able to show up to interview with someone feeling prepared, and then recording the interview and not having to worry about anything else after that. I take it from there. I handle the team, and I have weekly calls, accountability calls to talk about quality. And yeah, you don't have to worry about it. But as far as pain points, it's the details. You don't have time. If you're a full-time doctor or practicing doctor, you're probably maybe looking at how do I podcast on Google for about 10, 15 minutes, and then doing that multiple times and just giving up. So it's the details.
One of the things for me that I love about working with you, Desiree, is the ads. I've had a show for a very long time, and it's paid me back in spades in terms of the improvement of my life, because this is just to sell people on podcasting. I get to email strangers who are world experts in various topics and get to ask them the questions that I have. So the way I see it is each one of my podcast episodes is like a personal coaching episode. So the amount that my life has improved from being a better spouse, parent, financial manager, boss, doctor, communicator, community member is amazing. But it was really nice when Desiree was able to get me sponsors from the show, because now I've got some revenue from that as well. It's a bona fide, genuine business now. And that's something that I think we're also excited to share with our physician colleagues, is that this is something that we can help them execute on. So that's something that every so often I'd get someone that was interested in sponsoring the show, and I would have no idea how to have these conversations. I have no idea what my audience was worth. I had no idea what I could monetize and how and I would also try reaching out to people that were looking. I went through my LinkedIn feed and said, these people are clearly looking for physician attention. I'd reach in and it would be silence. And now I've consistently had ads for a long time, and it's been great. And it's something I could never had executed successfully on my own.
Yeah. So Brad, you talked about ads once, twice now, and maybe it might be helpful, Desiree, at this point to talk about what the offer is in terms of things that people can expect to see at the Doctor Podcast Network, ads being one of them. I think that's a really important place to start, because naturally people are going to talk about podcasting as a way to reach people, but it is nice when the podcast will pay for itself and or at least help you pay for it to some extent. Desiree, what are we offering here?
So we have 3 core offerings, depending on the level of involvement that you want with your podcast. If you don't have a podcast, then we do have a launch package, and you would have a kickoff call with me where I talk about next steps. I will pull together a checklist and give you input on brand direction based off of the things that I heard from you that you wanted. And then you will have access to everyone on the call at some point after the launch. And then we'll pull together a consumer avatar, identifying ideal listener psychographics and ideal content format. I will help with syndicating your show to all the major podcast apps, so you don't have to worry about being on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, and doing individual syndication to each one of those. And we'll handle your audio editing for up to 5 shows. So that's a launch package if you don't have a show. But let's say you do have a show. Oh, go ahead.
Desiree, can I take over for a second? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think just as 10,000 foot view to think about how we are breaking this down, the 3 different tiers are, the first tier is you just want to be a member of our community. So you want to be a member of our Facebook group, which is great because then you can ask questions and get answers from either us or other community members. You'll have access to our other offerings, like we're going to have monthly webinars where either one of us or we're going to have outside experts on things like legal aspects of a podcast, or how to grow your show successfully, how to manage social media, how to turn social media into a funnel to turn some of your listeners into clients if you've got some other offering, right? So we're going to have lots of perks for people that are members of the community, but we're not involved in podcast production, right? That's the first tier. The second tier is now we're starting to get involved, right? We're getting involved in a basic level. We're going to edit and post your show. And this is where you have access to ads. And these are, sorry, Desiree, what are they called when they're programmatic ads? Yes. Thank you. Programmatic. See, this is why she does the ads for me, because I can't even remember what they're called. So they're called programmatic ads. And then we're also going to have a lot of tools where we can create content for you and create social media posts and blog posts and clips. But it'll be up to you to post them yourselves. And then the last tier is what I have, which is where
hands off, white gloves.
Exactly. Hands off, white glove. I sit, I record, I end, I leave, I close my laptop, and everything happens. And we can go into more detail about what all of those, and this is where the ads are actually going to be different because these are going to be host-read ads, which have a higher, and then also will be able to help you monetize your show in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you did the overview. Does anyone have any questions that want maybe more detail? Let me see. Would love to just have networking of like-minded healthcare-related podcasters. That came from Transforming Healthcare Coaching. Great. That's what we are.
Yeah. So I think another way to keep this high level too is to describe that there's a community aspect to this, right? Which this comment's alluding to, where you're going to be able to be a part of community of people that are working towards creating great podcasts that, as a physician, healthcare related community, share ideas, successes, failures, what works, what doesn't, that sort of thing. In addition to having the opportunity to speak to experts that can help guide you along the way. But then you have that production side of things too, that Brad, you're talking about in terms of editing, and the detail at which your editing happens probably requires a webinar in and of itself, just to explain to you like what the differences are for that sort of thing. But suffice it to say that there are opportunities to be as hands-on or as hands-off as you want to be based on the tiers and the packages. And so I think we've designed this well where there's something for everybody, right? If you just want the community, it's there for you. If you want the community plus the production aspect of things where we're helping you in editing shows and a lot of the big ticket items that people really care about, are going to be in that package. And that top package is going to be the whole soup to nuts, doing everything for you. And honestly, I'll be transparent here. I've done each of these things in the past, and they all have amazing value depending on where you are in your journey. And so you're going to find something that works for you depending on what you need.
I think we should also talk about why we podcast. Physicians listening to this, I know a number of doctors come up to me, hey, I want to start my own podcast. They're not sure why. And we have different reasons of doing podcasts. So maybe you guys can share, what do you get out of your podcast?
Yeah. So Brad, you mentioned before that, and I've heard you talk about this. So that's the joy of getting to know other people and having the opportunity to have those interviews and to learn from them. And you mentioned it's like a personal coaching session for you. And then you get to share that with the world so other people get that coaching too, which I think is great. And honestly, a lot of my interviews, I felt the same way. I get to interview people from the personal finance space or career space, sometimes coaching as well. And I've really loved those interactions. And those interviews aren't the reason I started podcasting, but as I've podcasted, I've started to learn reading a book or listening to podcasts in preparation for a show that I'm about to do is something I enjoy immensely. And so I never expected that to be one of the reasons why I keep podcasting. But the reason that I started in the beginning was because I'm from the financial space. And I realized that, I'm gonna be honest with you, 99% of the financial industry is not someone you should trust. And I kept learning this message over and over again. And as part of that, it became apparent to me that if I wanted other doctors to understand enough about money that you could protect yourselves, I was going to need to get out there and help people understand what I had learned. So again, that catalyst to speed up that journey. And so for me, it's always been a financial literacy education piece to share. And then from a business entrepreneur side, if you start to let people get to know you, and podcasting is a very intimate way to do that. You have someone literally listening to you while they're taking that 2-hour commute in California. I don't know what that's, by the way, Mike. I live in North Carolina. So I commute 20 minutes door to door, and
it's 300 miles, but you go really fast.
Exactly. Yeah. I do drive a fast car. But so for me, I feel like that was an opportunity for people to get to know me in a way that they couldn't through written word. Right? When you hear someone's voice, you're going to get to know them in terms of their personality, in terms of their values, in terms of whether they're a good person or a schmuck. You're going to get to know somebody. And what that does from a business aspect is what's called that know and trust factor. It gets people to get to know you, and then they get to determine if they like you or not. And both of those things are good things, believe it or not. And if they do, they trust you enough to help you with services that you might provide. In my world, that has to do with financial stuff. Mike, in your world, I imagine that has to do with mentorship and coaching. And I'm still figuring out what Brad's trying to do down there. But
me too.
But seriously, for me, it was a reach. I wanted reach. I wanted to be able to help people. And the only way that I knew to do that, or the most successful way, I should say, that I found to do that is through podcasting.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's twofold. One that you talked about is networking. Imagine you're reaching out to somebody that you don't know and say, hey, would you mind talking with me for the next 30 to 45 minutes? And I just ask you question after question. They'll probably hang up on you. But if you say, hey, can you come on my podcast where I can introduce you to my audience? That's a lot different conversation on there. And that's allowed me to connect with people, authors, best-selling authors, leaders in the community, people I haven't reached out to before. we got connected through podcasting, just connections. And so that's one. I also use it as a platform for me to create content. I've talked in the past how I've used episodes of my podcast to actually help write a book. And I just took episodes of it so I could get my content out there. It allows me to create more content. And then I've had clients who said, I signed up for your coaching program because I listened to you for 3 years on jogging, on the treadmill, on in there. And it's, wow, talk about a long game, and I do it myself too. So when I was searching for vendors, we were using some marketing vendors, and on their website is, hey, listen to me on so-and-so's podcast, and really got me to know more about them and, what their business is, what their mission is. And so I use it myself as a listener. And so I think if you're a physician and maybe you want to get your voice out there, I think podcasting is the best way to go about it, because let's face it, technology has changed. Now, I don't know if you notice now with Google, we used to think that blogs, we would have to get content out through blogs. I don't know if the last time you used Google, but now it uses AI searches, AI responses. It's not going to blogs anymore. Where we're getting content now is through podcasting. And we've seen in the last election how they've used podcasts, how the candidates use podcasts to get their message out. So it is a very viable way of an economical way of getting your message out. Anybody can podcast.
Jimmy, you made the point earlier, Brad, I don't know what the heck you're doing. And you're right. I am still figuring it out, because you guys, when you started, you were both experts. Like Mike, you're an expert in entrepreneurship. Jimmy, you're an expert in finance. And so when I started, I wasn't an expert in anything. And that was the whole premise, was that I wasn't an expert in anything. And I wanted to get people in front of me so I could learn from them. After 400 plus episodes, now I do have some expertise because of the focus of some of my shows. So I'm reverse engineering this, and I am now taking a lot of the content that I created with the show, and I am turning it into a book, because now I am an expert I do coach and teach and lecture on efficient doctor-patient communication. And so I went in the other direction. But I think I have an interesting story about podcasting, in that once, for one episode, my wife came and joined me she co-interviewed with me, because we have a short-term rental property. Can you even be a doctor on social media if you don't have at least one real estate investment? So I felt so left out that which is so funny. The personal finance guy doesn't invest in real estate. No investments
in real estate.
And so we did an interview, and she was like, now I totally get why after the kids are in bed, you go down into the basement and you talk to strangers. Because it was so enlightening and educational and cool and fun. And she had a great time. So a great reason to podcast is just because it's awesome. It's an awesome experience. You'll grow your network. You'll be a better person for it from what you learn. And also there's the branding aspect on it, right? Because if you're, as you guys were alluding to, if you're trying to bill yourself as an expert in something, then the more content that you create, it's so intimate. Like you're in someone's ears and they feel like they know you. I actually interviewed someone on my show who was a listener, and that person was like, oh my God, this is so weird that I'm actually talking to you, as if I'm some kind of a celebrity, right? Like it was such an interesting interaction. And so all these are great reasons. So the networking, the branding, the self-improvement are all the reasons to podcast. So any other reasons that we're missing here?
I do just want to highlight that, because the people that are going to watch this now and also the recording later,
the edited version.
So one of the things that stops people is this idea of imposter syndrome. They're like, oh, but there are these other people out there, and like, who am I to put my voice out there? And it's going to be terrible. I'm just going to tell you right now, if you haven't podcasted before, your first podcast is going to be terrible. Like, it's just like your first several episodes, you're going to think they're good. Then you're going to be proud of them, and you should be, just to be clear. But then you're going to listen to those episodes 2 years later and be like, oh my gosh, this was so bad. And to Brad's point, we all started that way. So, talking into a microphone, for example, Brad, you got ears on right now. I do as well. Mike, I don't know if you wear headphones when you podcast. I don't know what it sounds like anymore not to hear my own voice in my ears, because podcasters, when they podcast, need to make sure that the audio quality is good. And so it's awkward for me to talk without these things in my ear. Like I can hear my voice as I'm talking right now, and that feels normal. And I remember when I first started, I was like, this is the weirdest thing in the world to be able to hear my voice in my head while I'm talking. And it turns out that becomes a natural thing, just like podcasting does. It is something that you work through. It's an iterative process. And I think that if I'd had a community there to tell me like, hey, you're doing good, keep it up. Here's some things to consider, right? And just keep going. We'll help you along the way. I think that's been really helpful because, Brad, to your point, I started learning about personal finance after my fellowship, and I started the Physician Philosopher 5 months after my fellowship. And I became an expert through all of this. And one of the ways that I did that was through podcasting, content creation.
I remember your first podcast interview.
Oh, gosh. bet it's
I
terrible.
remember I was like, okay, how do I give him the feedback on the quality
How do
of
I
what I'm
edit
hearing?
this
I
30-minute
think I'll
episode for
re-record
4
it.
hours to make him sound better?
Yeah. Well, your setup is a lot better now.
I
And you
appreciate
sound
that.
great.
Lots of help from you.
My first one was with my brother, and the bus sat there with whiskey because we needed something to help us relax because we were so nervous about it in red. And I just actually recorded another episode with him a couple of weeks ago, and we did it over Zoom, and it was like clicked on, talked to each other. It was a lot of great content. He has a PhD in health policy economics. So it definitely relates. It wasn't the two of us just talking about our family. And it was seamless. So like the difference between then and now, as you said, is dramatic. We were sitting in my basement with lavalier mics on with a completely different setup. We didn't know, I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. You two can get through that and we can help you do it.
Yeah.
We have
Exactly.
a couple more minutes before we're done here. So should we close up on some comments on the network, or was there anything that you wanted to cover before we hop off?
Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing.
So Arasto popped in. He said, "Good show."
Yeah. No, I didn't.
Yeah, because just let them know where, if they're interested, where can they go?
Yeah, go to drpodcastnetwork.co, not .com, please, /join, and you will go to our sign up page. There is a form on there. We do ask a series of questions to qualify. Are you a physician? Do you plan on launching at some point? Tell us a little bit about your goals, and then someone more likely than me, I will reach out to you and give you some information. So we did cover a little bit on our packages here, but you'll get more detailed information in email from me.
I think it would be a good idea, since we do have a little extra time, if we could talk about those offerings in a little more detail. Is that all right?
Got 30 seconds. I can do it.
Yeah.
Take 30 seconds.
Okay. So another aspect, we're going to be drafting off of each other, right? We're going to be helping each other grow our shows, right? And we have ways to do it through like Facebook pages and social media shares and featuring each other on our shows and just mentioning each other on shows. We are going to have ways to help each other grow, which is a huge part of being part of the network.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks for tagging along.
Yeah.
So again,
Thanks. Many thanks to everyone.
drpodcastnetwork.co is, if you guys are interested, we're looking for more physicians to join us in this podcast revolution. We love to hear from you, even if you're first starting out, or maybe it's just an idea, or maybe you've already had a podcast and just want to connect with other physicians. We love to hear from you. But yeah, we're really excited to get to know you. And again, sharing knowledge, sharing expertise, it's allow us all to grow. And so we've got this medium. How can we best use it to the best of our ability? And we believe that Dr. Podcast Network is the way to go if you want to be a successful physician podcaster. All right.
Absolutely. All right. That's it. Good night, everybody. Thank y'all for
Thanks,
tuning in.
We look forward
Thanks,
to
everyone.